Okay, guys, we are ready to start. I'd like to welcome everybody here this afternoon. So welcome to our continued School Talk lecture series in semester 2. And I'd like to formally introduce our guest speakers today. So today I'm really honored and excited to welcome a very dynamic group of young architecture students and graduates who, through collaboration, are prompting a powerful rethinking of our studio space. They believe true architectural learning happens not just through representation, but through actual construction, embracing failure, radical collaboration, and bold experimentation. Their work delves into experiential learning, materiality, and collective processes, showcasing how stepping beyond academic norms can transfer design education through practices of embodiment and making. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together in helping me welcome our UCT Student Collaborative cohort. Thank you.
Yeah, fantastic. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm David, and I'll be kicking us off. So just to clarify, some of us are recent graduates of the School of Architecture, specifically the master's program, and some of us are still current students at the university. We thought that we'd take a little bit more of an informal approach to a presentation, so bear with us as we run through this. So the title of our project is the unboxing, and we'll get into what that means a little bit as we go along. But essentially, we were approached by Afrikaburn and came forward with a design proposal, which was then built. I want to start off with the question of what is burn, or what we've come to call burn. Burn is the nickname for Afrikaburn. It's typically something that starts up in the deserts, in the Tankwa Karoo, and at some point people come together and they create some sort of structure or object on the landscape. These things are they're alien completely. People who come and they manufacture and they build, they slam nails in. At some points in the structure's life, people start to interact with it. Different structures are interacted with in a different way. We can even view these structures in relation to other ones that have been introduced into the landscape. And at some point in the journey of the structure, it gets burnt. And which is obviously quite a dramatic point in the narrative of that structure. But once it's burned, everything's cleared up and the landscape is left in the state that it was found in. Now just with the memory of that structure. So again, coming to the idea of what is burn, I think the way that we approached it, or we understand burn to be, is a story. And when we look at the scale of what this event is and what Afrikaburn is, it's a series of a whole host of stories being told at the same time. Different people interact with each other at different points. Different structures invite people to meet, congregate, break away, tell their own story. And on the more formal side of what Burn is, it's a radical, creative, participatory art festival. It's held annually in the Tankwa Karoo Desert of South Africa. And what happens there? It's essentially a temporary city where people are invited to come and put installations. There are theme camps, these mutant vehicles that look like rhinos, dragons, very interesting, weird things, theme camps, and these events or rituals where the structures themselves are burnt. There's no exchange of money and works purely on a gifting basis. And everybody's invited to actually participate. At no point are you actually spectating. And then finally, it's an invitation to be completely self-reliant. Everything's off the grid. So today, what we want to emphasize is that we're just telling you guys a story that we went through. We had different points where we interacted with other people, other things, but we essentially came together, designed and built a structure that was left in the desert. So how this all started was actually in the pink room, and we want to kind of debunk this idea that we ended up partying in the desert. It's not the only thing that we did, but as fun as that was, I think the emphasis is that we as students, past students, got to build or self-build a project in the desert. So maybe just how we're going to run through all of this. We had a lecture that we sat in, we formed a team, we did various applications, we were allocated a grant based off of our initial design proposal. We developed that proposal. We went through sourcing stage where we tried to find materials to work with. We worked off-site in preparation for when we eventually got onto the site itself. And then on a literal, this is how it all came to fall in place. We sat in this lecture after it finished. I'm sorry, I should clarify. Afrikaburn representatives came and gave us a lecture. They showed us all the wonderful, lovely things that we could potentially do. And as soon as that ended, I turned around and looked at Kiona and Rachele, who were standing over there. And the question was literally, are you guys in? And that's what happened. From that point, this one invited that one. We had Chloe, Lolly, Jemma, Kat, who's here with us today. Kità, who joined in. At some point, we had our partners join in as well. And then a whole host of different names who helped in at different points. And it's quite a messy collection of people actually, but at some point we had to take this a bit more seriously than, oh, I know a friend who wanted to be part of this project. So in our application process, we actually had to put some labels on who's who. So we needed a creative lead, a technical lead, someone who was in charge of the grant that we got, someone who could run the administrative side of things. We had people who came in on the weekends and helped us out, a social media coordinator and a safety officer. We giggle at that one. Maybe we'll get into why that is funny. But I'll hand over to Kità.
So now that our imaginations had gone wild and we've grounded ourselves, we needed to start thinking about how we can go back to reality, because we have this huge process of elaborate forms ahead of us. So our applications. We realized that we had a very short period of time. I think it took us about a week to get our applications in before the deadline was. Usually you can start in early September, but we decided let's just pull a typical architecture student move and sit down and do it in a week. Second thing, we had no money. So how were we going to do this? We were all just studying at the time. So luckily, Afrikaburn has a grant system. And through a series of forms that we had to establish what was our name, what are we doing, and then give them an Excel sheet of the exact breakdown of the cost of our structure within a week. And most architecture students don't know how to use Excel, so we learned really quickly. And this was our first application. This was our idea, and we costed this, and we gave it to them, and they said, well, that's worth 40,000 rand, which is quite a bit of money to architecture students. But when you break it down, we only got 80% of that budget. And Burn is very specific on how you manage your budget, and we weren't allowed to use it for anything except the build. So our second-hand material, everything to do with how we built it and how we got it there, added up very quickly. And that meant that we had very little money there. So what did we do? We just bootstrapped the rest. Luckily, friends and family came in clutch, and we were able to use our collective pool of resources and very quickly get ourselves into a position where we could go into the desert for 7+ days. Some of us spent 10 days, completely off it.
Maybe just to jump into the design and how we all started off. So right from the get-go, we loved this idea of telling children apart or giving an interpretation of part. And most people something like this little icon over here. But just doing a box in the desert would be a little bit boring. So we tried to deconstruct it, flip it open, pull it apart, and maybe these parts that we pull apart could burn in some sort of sequence or fall dramatically apart. And the first iteration didn't really reflect that. We started off with this box, which at some point would unbox itself, fall open and reveal something on the inside. We wanted people to bring and take various trinkets that were left in the structure itself. And in that way, invite people to engage with some sort of memory of someone who'd been in the structure before, and then take something for themselves or leave something behind and curate this collective home space. And as soon as we broke it open, it became this, what was the word? Deconstructed home that we started to speak of. We wanted lines of sight through the desert, which was a strong consideration for us. At some point, it started to look a little bit like a sundial. At various times of day, it would cast light differently on the ground bed. I think through most of the iterations, we had the strong idea of a line or a thoroughfare from one space, and then a collection point or a holding point. There was a point where we had to question what this collection point was. We had sloped walls, slanted walls, which we weren't entirely sure how we were going to make. But all this was happening on paper. It wasn't happening in model form or with materials yet. And as soon as we actually tried to visualize it in 3D, it looked a bit funky, a little bit wonky, not very elegant. And then, as a lot of us tend to do, we hop into models. At this point, it started to slim down. We could see the tectonics of it, how we were going to put this thing together, and potentially what materials we'd need for it. And it took on something like this, where we wanted to dramatize a wall, one part of the home, and then let it kind of pull apart itself. Turn the sound up for this one.
Again, big part of it is scavenging. So we're scavenging for our cladding material now. Predominantly me, isn't it? But the usual car comes in handy.
So as Kat was saying there, we started to scavenge. We had to actually try to find the materials that we could use to construct this structure out of. And luckily, we had someone who had a fresh stock of secondhand items that we could tap into and use. And that's what these materials actually look like. We actually had things that we could put our hands around and actually play with, measure up an entire stack of it. Yeah, we even had boardwalks that were used for carrying cement over. And those we wanted to try and work into the design itself with minimal effort. And then in addition to that, we needed to find doors and windows and things that are already built. and what we called ready-made items. So we ended up going to Rossouw in Maitland, and that's where we were able to source these various. It's incredible, but we can actually make a documentary out of this if we wanted, just based off of what Kat formed. But essentially, we went forward and we tried to find doors and windows that we can use, and those were all taken from Ross salvage yards or from donated items from family and friends. There was a point where we actually started to investigate flea markets, see if we can start the ball, keep the ball, or get the ball rolling on trinkets that are in the structure before people even arrive at Burn. And books are an easy one. People can pick up a book, flick through it, read the back of it, and kind of prompt the question, why was that specific book left in the structure? And if you wanted, you could take that book out. And then I'm sure we all have photos of our grandpa and grandma that sit in our houses. We're not always sure who that person is. But we started the design started to look something like this. Two boardwalks, which were, I would say, 15 meters long each. And we wanted to try and match the structure of these portal frames, kind of pulling and following those boardwalks. And we needed to find some sort of modular system where we could construct these columns and these beams that would sit in the columns, and we could replicate them. And depending on our time and efforts and money, depend how far we could actually pull this entire structure. And as it turns out, we didn't have the budgets and time to build the entire length of the structure itself, so we had to slim it down. And this is more or less what we landed on. And we're working our way towards beautiful photos. But that is where we left the Revit model and hopped into the build process.
So to get our build process in action, we had to find a temporary site where we could plan and build and assemble. And through connection of a friend, we were able to work on his farm. But from the beginning, the farm became our temporary workshop and our test site. It offered us the freedom to experiment, to make mistakes, and to take the time we needed to figure out how to bring the structure together. But from the beginning, we knew that the site wasn't permanent. We'd have to take everything down eventually and move it. The knowledge fundamentally shaped how we built. Every joint had to become something we could undo. Every connection needed to be strong but temporary. No glue, no fixing, we couldn't reverse. We were always building with disassembly and reuse in mind. The goal wasn't just to build a structure, it was to build a structure that could come apart and come back together again, somewhere entirely different. From February through to May, our weekends were fully booked. Every Saturday and Sunday was the build. It became a rhythm. Early mornings, cars packed with tools, and long days spent working with our hands out in the sun. It wasn't just a group of us either. We started pulling together friends from university. There was always something to do: sanding, sorting, and sanding. The farm became the shared space of learning and effort, where everyone pitched in, even if it was just for a day. We got so deep into the process that it started to spill out into our weeks. At one point, we were hauling planks of timber onto campus, bringing them into the university workshop to sand between classes. It might have looked ridiculous walking through campus with 6-meter planks of wood, but it was the only way to stay on schedule. Even if we weren't at the farm, the build never really paused. That was always something to finish, something to be prepped for the weekend. Looking back, it was very intense. Just to clarify, as people have mentioned before, a lot of us are previous students and have jobs or currently studying. So during the week, we have normal day-to-day lives, and we could only build this on Saturdays and Sundays or in the evenings. There were weekends where we were absolutely exhausted, times we fell behind on university assignments. Sorry about that. But there was also something deeply satisfying about seeing discarded, imperfect materials slowly start to become something valuable through nothing but time, effort, and collaboration. At the heart of it all was a commitment to reusing, the idea that materials are treated as assets and not waste. Every piece of timber we used was reclaimed and no new wood was freshly cut. Instead of designing the structure and then buying the materials to match, we did the opposite, where we designed the structure around the materials that we found on site. And we spent weeks finding, sanding, measuring, and labeling scrap wood. Wherever there were offcuts, rather than throwing them away, we integrated them into the structure as bracing, used them as tools of measurement, as you can see with David in the middle photo, tools of alignment, or whenever we needed to draw a relatively straight line. And these offcuts became vital functional pieces, giving the build unique visual language, a sort of patchwork, organic patchwork. To keep track of it all, especially knowing we need to take it apart and rebuild it later, we developed a detailed numerical labeling system. Every single component, down to the smallest brace, was tagged and logged. It wasn't glamorous. We used a lot of tape, but it was essential, and we knew we wouldn't be rebuilding in the same place. And it was our way of ensuring that nothing would get lost, and that once we reached our final site, that we could reassemble as intended. And then came the transport. Here we go. Once the build was complete on the farm, we spent 2 days dismantling the entire thing and packing it up for the Tankwa Karoo, a place as harsh and beautiful as it is remote. Roughly 10-hour-long drive, the route took us through the Karoo, including a stretch of road notoriously and affectionately known as the tire shredder. The structure was spread across 2 trailers, each loaded with nearly half a ton of weight. And we drove at about 20 kilometers an hour, trying to keep the trailers steady on the loose gravel, watching in the rear view as pieces of timber shifted and occasionally fell out as we bumped along the road, which is one of the photos, as you can see, us trying to strap everything back in. There were constant stops to re-secure straps, shift weight, or pick up a wayward beam that had rattled its way loose. And despite the labeling system, despite our planning, or lack thereof, it was chaotic, dusty, and exhausting. But somehow everything made it. And when we finally arrived in the Tankwa Karoo and began the assembly, with no power tools, no workshop, and no electricity, we saw the payoff. Piece by piece, we were able to rebuild what we had taken down, and the structure came together again. A little slower this time, a little bit more worn in, but nothing lost to the road, and still telling the story of what it means to build something with this intention.
Late night arrivals. And that it's Tankwa time. I did a lot of videos for Instagram, as you can tell. I was the logger. But and then we were there and we were in this desert. We arrived at night, so we didn't really get to see what it looked like, but we had the virgin ceremony entrance where we have to sound a gong and rub ourselves with dirt in the entrance. And me and my partner stayed for the full 10 days, but half of the team came and built. We arrived Thursday night, we built until Sunday. Sunday they went back, and then they came back the following Wednesday, and we stayed the whole time. So they were lucky enough to redo the entrance during the day and get a bit of that 2 days desert. And then when we woke up the next day, it's like you're on Mars. It's like, where are you? And it's just vast desert, and you're seeing this whole thing go up. That's a map that they draw of this town, and in the center is called the plaza, which is what you're seeing now. So we were lucky enough to be assigned the center bit of the map, and it was fairly flat enough for us to build. But to be honest, we had made it this far, so I bet you we would have just put it up regardless of anything. And then we kind of got to work trying to offload all our material off of the trailers. It's really hot. It's really cold in the mornings, and then it gets really, really hot, and then it chills down. But the first 3 days, we were lucky enough that the evenings weren't that cool, but we had terrible hot days. But we had 2 days to build, so we had to kind of fight through it. But David, our creative lead, put us to work. He said, first, make it look pretty. What we're working with. So it was quite nice to first lay it out just to get this shot, but to actually show our material bank and how we had used and created components that we could put up, take down, put up, take down. We could do this 5 times. And our joints were clean enough that we could kind of fit this all into trailers, which was quite an amazing thing to achieve at the end of it. It really felt like we had also placed fingerprints of gods, you know? We had laid this thing down, all of our hard work, all that sanding, and now it was ready to kind of be on site and play with this desert floor. So our first day 1, we put our columns up, and with each bay, we had to break. So 2 people had to hold that bay, 2 people had to hold that bay, and kind of somebody comes, nails it, no power tools, nails it, we make sure that's strong, and then we move on to the next. And that's kind of how we got our first day 1, all of our columns up. Notes here. End of day 1 was fine. I think we were feeling really confident that we were on time and on schedule. Yeah, the safety officer, on day 1, our safety officer had a heat stroke. So he kind of left us to do these columns without him. No one got hurt, so thank goodness. But day 2, he came ready to help us. Day 2, we finished the columns, we put the decks over, and then we started neatening up our cross bracing and preparing for our slanted beams to come in. While also just seeing, we're so confused as to where we are. You know, you just, everywhere you look, it's dust and sand, and the distance from between us and that structure is actually quite big. It looks small, and, you know, it was quite an adjustment to also just focus on building this and see how many other structures are doing the same. But that's how it started, looking at the footprint on our side. Day 2 also marked a lot of hoppers. We had this guy. It was Inga, was a legend. He just Ingo, yeah. He kind of came and helped neaten up. He came as far as didn't have any power tools. We had to store down and put the thing right there. And he legend was like, I'll do it. And they call them art sluts. So people would just kind of go around and just say completely help you for anything you need. But day 2, we struggled with our slants a bit and trying to get our thread rods through, but we made it. We actually didn't do too bad. But day 2 was long, and it was our last day, our Saturday. So we had to get the majority of it up. So I sadly didn't take a photo, but this is one detail that we learned from a very drunken man. His name was Cousin Mark. He was so annoying. But as soon as he showed me how to tie this shopper's hitch, and it's a very tight sailor's knot, he was a very useful man. I realized, like, we can do this. But so I didn't have a photo of him, but this it was nice to see how the finishing on site and to say this is where it was going to be, was influenced by our community completely, and for who wondered about. So we were kind of really happy, we were doing good, we thought we were all great, everything was fine. And day 3, we kind of, this was our last day, and we patched up as much as we could. We added boards to the back to help support seats, or seat backs, seat rests, and also to help support the bookshelves. And the team would leave on this day. So anything that wasn't done by the team, Ted and I would then spend the beginning of the festival kind of neatening up and trying to figure out what we can do. And everyone was really tired. This is just more shots showing how we're testing. And this was after day 1. It's a very satisfying project. So also the way we did it is, for details, we used thread rods, we used rope, and two tying techniques, the bow line.
No, play that one to the end.
Yeah, like this. Okay.
It's also worth noting that there was something beautiful about the sky at night, and we'd build until the sun's gone down.
Yeah, some blood, sweat, and tears. So we use the bowline technique at the top, which meant that it's one of the strongest rope methods for sailing that stays strong under tension. But as soon as it's loosened, you can untie the knot easily. So that was very useful for our beginning, to tie our slanted beams up to our columns. But then we needed to tension these beams together so that this whole system worked in one. And that's where Cousin Mark's detail came very strong, because you loop on itself and you kind of push it down. So it was nice to also see how rope and wood, something so solid and something so thin and fragile, can actually create a system that is very, very robust. Like you could swing on this thing in jungle gym, and it was actually quite strong. So this is our end product. There it was in the desert, up, we had done it. And we were pretty proud of it. So where we were missing, because not everything was great, was we didn't have our roof. That was one thing that we would have loved to do, but we didn't have the budget. We didn't have money, which was sad because it's the middle of the desert, and the one thing people are looking for is shade. So that was kind of a sad one. Yeah. But yeah, as soon as these guys came back on the Wednesday, we got to also see how it interacts with the rest of the festival, because it's basically a big playa, and at night and during the day, you kind of walk across and just look at all the structures that are there. So another important part that we didn't put enough emphasis on was, I mean, these also another nice pictures of us relaxing and chilling by the structure, really enjoying. But at night, there's a whole nightlife to Afrikaburn. There's like this one guy had done jellyfish that bob and go across this playa in a car, and there was rhinos that blew fire, and so the nightlife really took a turn on its own. Each of this artwork had a night presence through solar lights. Some actually went and had a genset just to power their lights. And it was quite remarkable how much effort teams put into lighting that we usually overlook, which we did. So we didn't see the thing at night. It was fairly sad until you were up close and in present, you could only kind of maybe see. We tried to put battery-powered fairy lights, and we had little lights that we put around, and it made it feel like Harry Potter ominous when you did arrive. But yeah, we kind of just needed to light it up to show off the day detailing, or just, create a new light for it at night by repeating, if there was neon lights, repeating all the repeated bays, or our ropes or something. So that's where we definitely improved. And then, what's there? Yeah, and then Friday came, and it was our turn to burn down our structure, right? So we're all really excited. We believe that we are honestly the best people ever, because we're going to go down in history as a group of beginner burners who built on the playa and burned next to structures like this. you know, with guys who have expertise and creative flair. And the ball had been up for 3 years, you know, and this was the year now that it was going to burn. So we were feeling fabulous. But after we went to that meeting, I think we realized that we were a bunch of unsupervised cadets who had managed to get this far and built it up. And we hadn't really planned for how it was going to to burn. And we didn't have any steps forward. They weren't going to supply us with fuel or with extra wood we had to bring everything. That's the nature of the burn. And you also have to break it down, burn it, and leave no trace. So as unsupervised as we were, the safety officer who had been telling us that we don't know what we're doing, took us to the fire marshal training after we were told we're not going to get our thing burned, to see how much detail goes into a supervised burn and the perimeters that are needed around it, and how these guys had a feeling for how long their burns would take. Whereas our structure, if we tried to burn it, they would have to break it down and hack it down to try and create a pile to burn. And in the evening, there's so many people tripping that spiritually, to see a creative artwork butchered like that isn't really the right way to burn. So, like true architects, we built something that stands still. Still stands. It is in the desert right now. And I mean, we're hoping that next year we'll get a chance to add to it and actually think about nightlife and burning, and get it to burn in a way that is as magical as some of these structures that went up, because it's really something to see. But it's still beautiful. We had a flower that grew next to it. We had a whole garden. Yeah. Did you add more photos? And this is David showing Vertical Studio.
This is kind of strategic, I'm not gonna lie. Let me just to start the conclusion. We've kind of understated how on the fly we did this. Literally, we had the presentation, 5 days later, we sent the application. Then we got the grants, and then we just started building. This was with 0 to no planning. And I kind of want to prompt everybody here, now that there is a bit of time before the next build and the next application set, to think about whether you'd like to do something like that. If we can do this sort of, or produce something like this in such a short span of time, if you have a little bit of foresight, you can do something even more incredible. And also, just having gone through this process, we've already had people approach us about wanting to collaborate and see how we can improve the structure that's there at the moment, and take it further. I think from our side as a group, some of us, life is taking us in different directions. We're also looking for people to join in on our project. If anybody is interested, you guys can approach us. But yeah, maybe to conclude, this is the story that we went through, and I wish that some of you might experience something similar. Thank you.
Thank you, David and team, and thank you to all for joining. I don't know if there's any questions. I'm sure David and team would be, and Katendi and team would be happy to take any questions. But, anybody in the room? Maybe I'd like to prompt maybe just a comment from my side, which I find really fascinating about the work is, that it's not something that is decided. We often, I think the work that we do as architects, we get briefs, we start running, and trying to make this thing perfect. And for me, it's in the imperfections that there's the beauty. It lies in that space. I think also from maybe the process that they've demonstrated, I think what's really remarkable is that it is about trial and error. They had a short amount of time, limited resources, limited labor, and teamwork. And then, of course, all of that comes together and culminates through iteration. And after iteration and iteration, you get somewhere. And for me, I think your insights about what you're walking away with is far more valuable because it means that you're transformed through the process, right? It also means that you've built a rapport at Afrikaburn. You come back, you tell these stories, you go back another time, you try again and again, and then this thing gets refined. So I think it is more than the architecture, it's about the relationships. And it's about developing these sustainable relationships through the methods of making and embodying yourself in this process of making. And for me, I think that's the really remarkable thing. So I really applaud you guys and thank you for coming to chat with us. Any questions or someone wants to add to that? Yes, please, Megan, and then Harry.
Question, you've seen now how other of these sculptures burn and how even from like the kind of members that are used, the way that it was built, it creates sort of a theater to the burn. Having seen that, do you have some thoughts about what you would do to this and what kind of fire, what kind of burn you're wanting to make, and what can happen with the structure? Do you have some thoughts on that?
I think we can all chime in. Maybe I'll give us like a brief conceptual idea that we had. It looks like a set of fingers, and what we imagined was that we'd burn it from one side and it will slowly collapse into itself that way until there's nothing left.
And kind of going off of that, as we kind of said, is that none of the joins were glued in or permanently fixed. We used a lot of bolts. So that I think the idea with the burning is everything's kind of in tension. And when we remove those bolts and then maybe burn the ropes, everything will collapse in on itself, which is also quite an interesting way to think of it. Yeah.
I'd like to speak about like what's it's called Afrikaburn. And the burning experience is something that I didn't realize how orchestrated it is. You know, when you get to a space which is sort of like emphasizing this off the grid lifestyle, this very, I guess, community-based event where you don't really have a set schedule. There's no, particular lineup. If you want to play music, you're bringing it in your trailer with you. And you could be somebody that's from Berlin. That's a great DJ, but there's no kind of like credits. There's just you bringing your particular piece to the desert to enjoy with everybody. And what's so crazy about the burn is that it also felt a bit like watching a comet, like what I assume watching a comet would be for people in like the 50s, where they all sort of like gathered to see this natural kind of like element. And yeah, so I think once we saw how designed the burns were, we realized that as architects, we didn't necessarily meet the brief. We didn't have this like plan in place to burn the structure. And I don't know if you guys saw, well, you obviously saw the hourglass sort of shape that was constructed out of wood. That was lit at the top end and the bottom end so that it twisted into itself as it burned. So they had initially designed this thing, imagining its burning process. So as architects, like we were so focused on building a structure, that we didn't realize that it's such a methodology and it's such a process. And we actually met some lecturers that worked at Bartlett. So you can see that the structural knowledge like transcends your average group of architecture students that are trying to do everything at their first go. So I think in future, as you said, Megan, like seeing these particular structures and kind of having an idea of how they function as a burning object, we'll have to, and with collaboration with new people who are interested in that kind of stuff, designed to burn.
They have it burn as a bay, and then like a vortex spills out on each side, very dramatic, and then burns for long.
With the hot air and the cool air, like tornadoes.
Very designed.
To add
Realize
to
you
that,
can do anything.
there are people that design the fire and they work backwards.
Not true. I mean, for example, the lecturer from Bartlett who approached us, he had an entire studio in London based off of designing to burn. So these guys would meet designers, intervene at the point where they're going to start burning these structures and design it in a way that it's going to burn. They last year they did this entire structure that looked like a cone that kind of pulled in a very interesting hourglass form. And when that thing started to burn, the wind struck it in a way that it created these tornadoes. I think they counted 10 or 12 tornadoes that I want to say they were 5 stories high. And that was the dramatic element. And that was design. They had little models and simulations to show how that could be done.
We had another question from Harry.
Yes, I want to say thank you so much for the energy and the lovely presentation. And now that I've heard your comments on the lecture that you made, and also listening to what you said about connections and people coming together, and that's what it's about. So the guy that was here last year to present Afrikaburn, from which you then applied for the grant, he will be coming again. But that lecturer made contact with me through him and told me how fantastic it was to be a student. And who is studying in engineering how the burns happen. So when the Afrikaburn guy, and I forget his name now, when he comes to speak, we'll get him for a school talk. Then that PhD student will also speak to us online about the process and about the burning. So you made some connections there, and we're going to see some of that coming back here, which is fantastic. Thank you.
There was another question.
Sorry.
Yeah.
But from an ecological point of view, like how does Afrikaburn defend itself? Because burning structure like wood and other materials, like it would affect climate change.
Fantastic question. I'm going to streamline your question a little bit because there's even a broader question that we can ask. By burning, you're essentially wasting materials. I mean, there's something poetic in the fact that it does burn, but if we're talking about the greater or larger purpose of what these structures can do or become, I mean, amongst ourselves, we started to question whether everything has to burn, or is there some sort of collaborative direction that we can take with Afrikaburn in giving these structures a second life, or part of these structures a second life, where they can go towards a community and actually serve a greater purpose than just burning for one set ritual. I think the amount of CO2 that's released from a burn is quite high, but by comparison to our cows, I don't think Afrikaburn as one event is too dramatic, but don't quote me on that. I've never done the calculations.
Yeah. So you aren't allowed to use any accelerants on these structures that have high carbon emissions. So you're not allowed to use petrol or treated wood even. It takes a longer time to burn and there's additional chemicals in those things. So, and the last, Afrikaburn is about leaving no trace.
Yeah.
And the Kamuhuza are a very hardy environments. There are certain sections that are under conservation, but the groundscape itself is very easy to just take away your debris and it's able to continue living in the desert and scorpions will still scuttle over it. But it's not an abundant ecosystem. So it's essentially not disrupting too much.
Just to add on as well, I do recommend maybe like if you're interested in this, like maybe researching a little bit more on there. They have a lot of information about this on their website. But also, you know, just from the things that we see, there's no, sorry about the topic of conversation, but there's no like toilets. They have modular toilets. So all of that then goes to, if I remember correctly, I remember hearing about this. It goes to specific areas where they actually turn that into like compost and they treat all of that waste. And there are other ways in which they combat maybe different areas, not necessarily the smoke and the things emitted from the burn, but they combat in other ways, which is quite interesting, like for a festival as big as it is. Yeah.
As architects, it's a nice thing for us to think of. We're creating things that are very permanent. They have certain impacts on our environment. So how do you balance your carbon sequestration with your permanent structure that's going up? Things like net zero buildings. There's always a payoff that you get, that you need to take one thing out of the earth and you need to give something back.
Yeah.
Also, maybe I'll just point out that we built everything with secondhand materials. So in a way, it's better than if we bought brand new stuff.
Yeah.
But I guess it's not a game about trying to be better. It's about solving the problem.
And it's also it's a spiritual moment. So fires, away from it burning down the structure, fire, to gather around a fire is what they're trying to capture. And when you have 10,000 people, how big do you need that fire to be, you know? Why not let it burn, let it burn down something that is a creative sculpture and it's an energy exchange. It's very hippie. Very hippie. You got to get into that world, you know.
Yeah.
If not, it can be, you can start saying, I will take down, because there are structures that you don't have to burn. So you can dismantle it and reuse it, but money. It'll all come down to who is it, where is it going, who is it going to go to, will it be rebuilt, or is it just going to go and sit there as well? And that's always a different story.
For example, it's nearly over 7,000 rand to bring the structure back if we were going to. Yeah. So, and to find more budgets is very difficult. There are ways of funding. And if you do go the grant process route and you find that you need more money, there are fundraisers and motivational letters that you can go to people with.
On my, just out of interest, this one is the most amazing because these are all pieces of plank like that. It's all just nailed together at an angle, and they created their structure out of that. And because it's so small, it was easy to burn. Whereas I think we went very structural. We went for very deep beams, very thick this. We wanted to get it to stand. But now it will be really hard to get this wood alone to burn. We need kindle. You know, we need something that will spark and hold the light and hold the fire. So that's for next year.
Thank you for sharing that. In terms of designing system, like the joy as part of the process, that can use as ways to channel social change within our communities. So for me, seeing fire being engineered, I mean, not so far away, fires aren't engineered, people are losing their houses. That's something that you can. Yeah. So how do you build to design as means to preserve structure and then let other things that are not as important to the, like I saw a neighborhood picture of like a family that's important, like how can we preserve history?
Yes.
But so, yeah, because fire is inevitable.
Yeah.
It is inevitable. Like how can we design?
Yes.
Happening with those options.
Very much so.
So fire details for timber structures are something that I find quite interesting. And we would have to remove all of the metal, the big bars of metal out for this structure to burn properly. We were told by the lecturers at the University of Bartlett that if we didn't do that, our main members would stay up for longer, which is actually a good thing if you are designing to prevent people from losing their houses too quickly or being able to remove things from their homes. But this, as a design lab to test fire-rated details, comes short when we're not able to treat the wood. It's not able to, but it's supposed to burn fast, and treated wood burns very slowly.
I was also thinking maybe from a conceptual point of view, if anybody wanted to take this line forward, but these are all intentional burns, but what if we have a structure that burns in an unintentional way? And can we learn from such a prototype how people maybe in other scenarios face unplanned burns and how how one can intervene in order to prevent unplanned burning. But yeah, how can you prototype unplanned burning? Anyway, just thinking.
I mean, our structure wouldn't burn, so just follow us.
Funny.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Yeah, any questions or last minute remarks? No? Thank you all for joining.
Wait,
us.
go for it.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Yes, go for it, Chieta.
I just wanted to ask David, first of all, well done for a very large presentation and don't worry. But I saw your master thesis like open page, so I just wanted to ask if there was perhaps some
Someone had
to mention. Yes. Yes.
I'm not gonna lie, I think a lot of this started with some sort of connection to my master's thesis.
Yeah,
Yeah.
The specifically, I don't know if you guys will find it,
We're
but
trying.
I guess maybe to give everybody else context, my thesis centered on this idea of taking notes of the material bank that is involved. So this is my thesis. And there were points where, because it was unplanned, I couldn't run it in the way that I wanted to. So
To
I,
give you an idea, this was David yelling at us that we weren't doing it right for like an
Yeah.
So
We honestly just wanted to start building. And he was
Yeah,
like, no, we
so we
have
need
to
to
lay
do
it
it
out.
properly.
And then we laid it out and he went back to try and get it all straight, all aligned. Like,
redoing everything.
Yeah, you tried to shift the decks there. I feel like that is not happening.
4 meters long. Yeah.
it comes
So, yeah.
it comes down to the
Yeah.
coding of materials and knowing what went into it and how you can take it apart. Yeah.
It's really literally make the project to it, and yeah, it just emphasizes how important it is to make in the process of learning. So
Very
Yeah.
much.
But just on that note, this was not my project at all. I didn't drive this, no, check, except for this photo. That was me.
And the paperwork.
And then,
Paperwork.
Yeah, and I hope this also helps to see what money can get you these days, you know, in small projects. Or when you're doing doing a 3-story house with, you know, there's levels of where can you see value in material and make it cost effective, and where do you put beauty, you know, and what does that really look like? Because at some point the aim is to build. That is your aim. You need to get stuff up. And whether it's small or big or in between, whether it's 20 grand, 40 or $1 million, like, you know, you kind of need to start grappling with what that looks like in your scope. And this is a great way, especially when you can get grants, just to kind of not focus too much on design, but also construction and build.
I also feel like the initiative of this whole talk was also that as students, we should get excited about trying to do things like this. Like if you find opportunities, just do it, go experiment. And it's probably not going to go as you plan, but like that's what's so exciting about this project, like learning and doing and designing and actually making what we designed without all of the restrictions.
The worst somebody
Yeah.
can say to you is no.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
and to us, they said yes.
yeah.
We were shocked. Yeah, we were so shocked when they said yes. We couldn't believe we had to do it.
There's so much creativity that this degree offers, I guess, and this is everything that we've learned in the same building as you guys, you know? So it's just so cool to be able to have a creative outlet for your very pragmatic degree. You know, you might go into the workplace, but there's always things to do with the skills that you learn. And that's what's really cool about it, I guess.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Oh.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah.